Hey, and welcome to Finlos Lives. In this episode, I wanted to start by following up a little bit from the most recent episode that I recorded with Eva, The Art of Fucking Up. We were having some conversations afterwards, and we thought it important to share that as well put together as our relationship sounds in the conversations that I produce for the podcast, that is sort of an artificial situation where we are, and especially I am, putting my best foot forward in a very produced way. It's interesting that we have this conversation about what it looks like to fuck up and how to behave after that, what accountability looks like, what moving forward and growing looks like. And not too long after, just a few days after that, Eva and I, it wasn't a fight, but we definitely got into a difficult conversation about, in some ways that I haven't followed through with commitments that I made in terms of my behavior and how we maintain our households and our routines and basic stuff, but the very foundational stuff that really keeps a family going and a relationship going. And, you know, if it's one or two things here and there, that's one thing, but these are issues that have come up in our relationship for many, many years, if not from the very beginning. Patterns and behaviors that are just problematic. And so we're going back and forth, and just like the behaviors that we were describing, you know, I tend to fall into that pattern as well, where if Eva points out something that I've done that I'm not very proud of, and that is frustrating because I feel as if I've made growth, but obviously the behaviors that I'm demonstrating show that I haven't made as much growth as I should have, I get defensive and I close up and stonewall, or I might snap and lash out a little bit. All of those telltale behaviors that we discussed. And, you know, it's a valid point to make that we are people, and just like everyone's relationships, ours is a constant work in progress, and that we are constantly assessing where we can stand to grow and improve, and where are we successful, so that way we can make sure to continue to do those things as well. And what I do struggle with, and this is one of the lingering aspects of that fuck up mentality, is that I really do get down on myself, and I tend to become very negative. And so I'll start replying with sarcasm or frustration, and I'll just continue that pattern of harm. And so I want you to hear that it takes work, and it is always a work in progress. When things were really bad for Eva and I a few years back, really bad, we essentially separated. We were living in the same home together, but for the good of our children, and because we were dedicated to, at least for the time being, finding a stable pattern where we could still maintain our co-parenting relationship, but our romantic partnership was definitely put on hold. It was a very difficult time, and when I proposed the Finlos Loves podcast to Eva, when I asked Eva to join me for those episodes, I think that I wanted to be able to share these conversations with other people who are struggling as we had struggled, how I struggle, and to normalize the fact that relationships are messy and complex and complicated, that relationships grow and change over time, and that it's important to not close off communications, because it is very easy to get lost in the negative parts of those really hard conversations when it feels like drowning, when it feels like all the work that is being done towards repair and towards trying to demonstrate how much it matters that the relationship continue, and it seems like all you can do is tread water. And that is okay. In that moment, it is okay. And if things change, then you have to change with it. And if things in the relationship improve, then it's because you are working to improve them with your partner. And maybe they can't, and maybe they won't. In any case, I wanted to share that with you to let you know that I am just as prone to turn into that fuck up that we were describing, that I am not beyond the trap of self-sabotage. And I just wanted you to know that you're not alone. And I want to thank Eva for always holding me accountable and expecting that I will hold myself accountable, because it's not enough that there is somebody who maintains that structure. It needs to be reciprocal, and all parties need to give care and to maintain the boundaries and responsibilities and the commitments that are made. So I hope that this bit of discussion is helpful for you. Eva is incredibly smart and incredibly sophisticated and very experienced and supremely talented in their ability to see through to the truth in many situations. And I have benefited greatly from that skill set. And I want to acknowledge that as well, that it's something that we continue to grow together. And now for what we've been watching. Recently we finished the 3rd season of Star Trek Picard. And Star Trek The Next Generation was a show that I watched growing up and then had the immense pleasure of rewatching with Eva in its entirety in some of the earlier parts of our relationship as we cohabitated. I love Captain Picard. He is one of those characters that really defies the norms of typical masculine macho culture. I mean, he still has his problems, especially as a character who was written in the 80s and early 90s. There's some gender issues present in the show, of course, but Picard is sophisticated and cerebral and calm, and in ways that evolve over the course of the development of his character, he is nurturing and supportive and caring and compassionate. And these are all qualities that, as a young person and then again later as an adult, I really strove to embed in my own behaviors. So when it was announced that they would be releasing a new series just centered on the character of Picard, we were very excited because this is a character that we both really like. And the rest of the crew of the Enterprise D, they hold a special place in our hearts as well. Worf is one of the greats, and Data as well, and Geordi, and all of them. So it was really cool to know that we would have the opportunity to see those characters down the line in their lives. I was very impressed with the aesthetic of the show and how it adopted some of the stylistic narrative choices of modern long-form television with an extended narrative as opposed to episodic narratives, and the opportunity to see how Picard had aged and how he struggled to adapt to the world as it changed around him. Those are very interesting topics, and I thought that the first season really was courageous in how it dug into those things. It also introduced some really interesting characters that would continue throughout seasons 2 and 3, mostly season 2 and some of them into season 3. Key among them would be Raffi, who is a new character, and Seven of Nine, who is a Borg character from the Star Trek Voyager series, which I watched a little bit of, but I didn't really watch it through its entirety. But I'm aware of who she is and the role that she played in that show. And along with a few other characters, the captain of the new ship that they use, I can't quite remember his name right now, but I really enjoyed his character and how they modified the goofiness of the holographic doctor from Voyager and sort of modified it as into a more comedic aspect into the show, which is really, really cool. Where I do think the show struggled, and this was something that carried over into season 2, and some of that is because of COVID, but in season 1, I didn't find this story to be very compelling. The idea of the barrier between artificial and biological life was a theme that was present in The Next Generation, mostly with Data being finally deemed an artificial life form, but that he is a life form, and one that has all of the rights of all other lives. And then, of course, with the Borg, that line becoming very blurry as the Borg assimilate biological life forms and hybridize them with machinery. But the season 1 focusing on sort of the evolution of the cyborg body, eventually ending with, and spoilers of course, with Picard and his new golem body. I think that this is a weakness that carries through the entirety of the series, is that it's hard to maintain the intensity of emotions without stakes. And having such a beautifully crafted and beautifully acted character as Sir Patrick Stewart embodies Picard, I do think that the ultimate exploration of the end of his life was the depth of the potential for that exploration was lost as they immortalized him, or at least got rid of the immediate threat of his Irumodic syndrome or whatever it was called. It was an interesting way to wrap up that season, to essentially turn Picard into the thing that Data always wanted to be. And it really is weird the way that they managed to get Brent Spiner, the actor who portrays Data, to fit into each season to varying success and weirdness. Season 2 was a bit of a mess, and from what I understand, a lot of that had to do with the fact that production took place during the worst part of the quarantine for COVID. And so it makes sense that production was wonky and that a lot of the production seemingly took place in Los Angeles, but like on the streets, not in sets or studios or anything like that. So there's a lot of on the ground footage of the various characters running around the streets of LA, which was, again, just very bizarre. And then Brent Spiner is a villain, and the Borg are back again, and I just have to say that I get that every show has sort of its bad guy, its enemies. But this way that they keep recycling this threat of the Borg, again, narratively, what it does is it reduces the impact of what Picard and the crew of the Enterprise D had to go through in the actual show when Picard was assimilated into the collective and became Locutus. The idea is that this is a huge psychologically and physically traumatic event for Picard and for the crew. And, every time that they bring back the Borg, it kind of diminishes the impact of what that sacrifice meant or what that long-term trauma represents. Because as opposed to allowing Picard to process and deal with this in a way that could be reflective of what healing looks like, it always just shows Picard as being antagonistic to the Borg and ashamed and embarrassed and in pain. And all of those are true and they make sense for what he had to go through. But it is sort of a repeated motif that has now been examined a few times. At least with season 2 of Picard, when you have Dr. Girardi now combining at the end of the story to become this new hybrid Queen Borg. At least they're kind of dealing potentially with what the Borg in the modern time of the show might look like as something different, as something a little bit new. Something that is actually potentially not less dangerous, but potentially more constructive. There's the potential that this version of the Borg might be something that is new and different. And I think that was an exciting way to end the season 2. The other thing I think season 2 does really well is allows the character of Picard to examine his childhood in ways that we hadn't seen before, and why his concepts of family were so damaged or shaped by really negative childhood experiences. It's a bit of a mess. Again, like the season 2, that's a running theme, is that it was a bit of a mess. You have the idea of Picard talking to this spectral therapist who might actually be his father. You have him returning to the childhood version of his ancestral home, the vineyard. You have him dealing with his mother. And the other thing that I think is problematic about this is that it does fall into the stereotypical trope of the psychologically damaged, repressed woman, the yellow wallpaper storyline. And that was a little bit disappointing. But the positive is that I think it was interesting to see how Picard had such powerful memories of both of his parents and how they were shaped by time, and how, as he was able to relive those experiences, he was able to examine them from the different perspectives of both his father and his mother, and see that both of these parents, both of these people, had issues and had problems and were complex, and they were both in their own way trying to protect child Picard, child Jean-Luc, from the harm that was potentially present in his life. Season 3, I think, is probably the most even of the seasons. I think it also is the most consistent in terms of its momentum and its overall story. I think the way that it uses the changelings as the, what do we want to call it? The people in front of the curtain, bad people, when we know that there's going to eventually be a reveal of who's the people behind the curtain. I think that was really effective. We never watched Deep Space Nine, and so the Dominion War is something that is a little bit over our heads as far as the story goes, but we're able to pick up enough to understand that this is something that is relevant to Star Trek's past, and that these are people who had been dangerous to the alliance between the Klingons and the Federation, etc. So it was cool to see that plot element, and it's paying respect to the fans who have seen all the various incarnations of the show, because there's characters from Voyager, there's characters from Deep Space Nine, there's characters from The Next Generation, and obviously that was the real selling point with Picard Season 3, is that this is the season that they finally bring everybody back to the bridge from the original, well, not the original series, but from The Next Generation. And I find it interesting. I read recently an interview with I almost called him Jean-Luc, an interview with Patrick Stewart, where he was worried at times that the show was crossing the line into, I don't remember the exact words that he used, but the equivalent is like clickbait. It was nostalgia. It was just using the spectacle of having all of the original cast back together again. And I think that is fair. I think that there are a few moments that are a little bit hammy, especially with Riker. And the thing, though, is that it fits his character perfectly. And in fact, I think Riker has an interesting story arc in that his relationship with Picard has now become almost more like a sibling than like a father-son relationship, which I find to be very cool. But the Riker dealing with the loss of his son is relevant to how the show is exploring the relationships between parents and their children, which also I think presents my biggest complaint about season 3 of Picard is that, wow, was it patriarchal. And I mean, I get it, it's Picard's show, the show is called Picard, and so when we find out that Picard has a son, that's great, that's awesome. I think it's really cool, it's an interesting narrative. We get to get some of the answers as to why the relationship between Dr. Crusher and Picard might have broken down. It's perfectly reasonable to think that he might have a son, but the show becomes so focused on this idea of the relationship between fathers and sons, or fathers and children, I should say, that paternal relationship. You have Picard with Jack Crusher, you have Riker dealing with his son, you have Picard as the father of the crew, you have, and I think honestly the best relationship that gets explored, even if it is brief, is the Ro Laren and Picard. That was very powerful storytelling. But the emphasis on biological family over that of the chosen family, I think both hurts the overall message of what the Next Generation did so well, which was make the argument that found families can be just as powerful and just as strong and just as important as biological families, if not even more so. Otherwise, why are all these people so loyal to Picard in the end? But then when this argument about biological family becomes the crux, the Borg Queen is like, oh, I have claim to you because you have Borg in your DNA. And Picard's like, oh, it's my son. It's all of that whole... it was a little tired, and that was not the part that was keeping me interested in the story. I do have to admit that. I think that Picard having a kid is an interesting conflict. But the combination of it being so... how do you say it? I don't know. I think that the fact that his biological son became more important to him than his crew, than his chosen family. They should be parallel relationships, and they should build and grow with each other. One should not take precedence over the other. And then again, of course, tying in with another Borg story. We get it. The Borg was Picard's bad guy. And we're left now at the end of the season with this lingering question of, okay, so they defeat the Borg Queen again. Which version of the Borg Queen is it? Who knows? Where's the Jurati Borg? I guess that they're over on the other side of the universe, kind of hanging out at some random spot, waiting for whatever that secret enemy was going to be. And that... it all just wraps up very nicely. The stakes that were very good in the beginning, the stakes, the sense of dread and fear and loss, were all built so well that the tidiness of the ending was a little bit, I think, it diminished the show a little bit. I'm okay with them having the opportunity to fly on the Enterprise D because Geordi's restored it. That's perfect. That's well within his character. But when you see the other ship, I'm trying to think of what it's called right now, the Titan. When you see the Titan like phasing in and out or cloaking in and out and just happen to like just survive, it's all so nice and tidy, and nobody dies, and everybody, well, whatever her name was from the old school Borg episodes, who's now an admiral, she dies. Okay, big deal. But none of the main people, there's no sense of stakes by the end. And of course, we come to learn that this has all been a soft launch for the potential new series, Star Trek Legacy, and another generation of Picards gets to be at the helm. So, I don't know. I think Rafi got a little bit short shrift in this season. I love Rafi. I think that what they've done with 7 of 9 is fantastic, and I think that she gets some good time on the show. So I think the idea of Rafi and 7 of 9 being in command of this ship is great. But the Picard son, whatever. It's not my favorite part. The LaForge daughters were badass, though. I thought that was a very nice touch. And she's way cooler than Picard Jr. So I think overall, I really enjoyed watching Sir Patrick Stewart be Picard because I could watch that all day. There are parts of each season that I liked and that I didn't like, and that's like the most ho-hum of reviews you can get, but I think they're worth watching. I'm kind of hoping that we're putting Picard to rest for some time. I think that we've seen him play cards enough now. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, I hope that you'll share the podcast. You can find me on social media, or you can email me, finloslives@gmail.com, or you can look me up on my website, finloslives.com. There you can leave a voice message if you'd like to leave a comment via the SpeakPipe app. I look forward to our next conversation.